Hello, it's Dr. G here, and today we're going to talk about the important topic of web presence, particularly website platforms. So, now that you have gone through a number of the modules in the promotions class, you've learned how to identify your target audience. You've recently developed a brand identity or you've evaluated a brand identity for the firm that you're working with. So now it's time for us to create and optimize your web presence. Because your website is the face to the world, it's really important that you understand the basics of operationalizing a website in a really great way. So the first thing we're going to talk about is web platforms. And so let's talk about something that you need to do right away, and that's decide on web hosting. So there's a couple of different ways that you can think about hosting your website. So if you imagine yourself, you've got yourself and your laptop or your desktop that you use for school or for work, you know that it holds quite a bit of data on it. Well, one of the things to think about when you're having a website is that there's so much data that goes into your website from people coming and going, all of the data that lands on it. There's far more information on a website than you're going to be able to host on a particular server or PC itself. That said, as an organization, you need to decide, am I going to protect or am I going to own all of the servers or the data that all of our web presence has on it on a server itself that sits within the walls of the organization? Or am I going to go to a cloud platform or a hosted site where another organization will host the data for you so that you don't have to worry about having that equipment and securing that equipment on your own? The reason there's different reasons why people decide to do this. One is maybe you want to secure your own servers, your own website, because you have very important proprietary information. Or maybe you just feel that your information needs to be so secure that you have to control that yourself. The reasons why people often outsource this is that it's really costly and it's complicated to do on your own. And for the most part, we've come to a point in time where the web hosting services are so secure and so reasonable that many people just choose to do this on your own. So it's important for you to select a web host, and there's hundreds of these out there. Some people will select a web hoster from where you have your web platform or your web the website is built. There's many different web hosts, so I would ask you to go on the internet, do some searching, ask around other people who have websites, and determine what might be the best solution for you. One thing though is you need to start when you're thinking about a website. The first thing I want you to think about is who's going to host it. Even before you start thinking about what you're going to name or your URL. Are you going to host it internally or are you going to host it externally or outsource that piece of it? So that's the first thing I want you to remember, and remember this for the quiz. Now, the second thing you want to do is you want to get a domain name. Now, the domain name is the URL, or the name that you type into the browser. So as you know, domain names are hard to come by. Many of them are already taken. But what you want to think about is that the domain name that you choose for your website must be registered. So you have to have a certificate and privacy with that. So that is generally something, if you purchase a domain name from somebody or you purchase it on your own, you will need to ensure that your certificate is up to date or your website will not function. Most domain names are taken by third-party providers, as we talked about. So if you were to get Kristy.Grayson.com, probably not going to be there, KristyGrayson.com or drgrayson.com. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But what you want to do as much as possible is select a domain name that is memorable and reflects your brand. So you don't you want to get as close to your brand as possible, or something that's going to trigger somebody being able to remember that name. It should be simple, obvious, and as short as possible. So don't be putting a bunch of, extra stuff in there, a really long domain name, because people do not you don't want to accidentally, what we call fat finger, or inability to type, or too long to remember. Try to create have it simple, obvious, and short as possible. The next thing you want to do is you want to purchase as many of the variations of the domain name as possible. And I know this can be quite expensive, but no, if I were to buy KristyGrayson.com, somebody might do KristyGrayson1.com or Kristy.Grayson.com, and maybe that's not really that important to me. But in some circumstances, imagine you're Apple or Nike, you are going to want to do purchase as many of those domain names as possible, because you will have competitors that will try to get that domain name, or maybe you want that domain name later on and you might have to bid a lot for it. So if possible, to avoid the fat finger situation, or to avoid a competitor taking your URL, try to purchase as many as possible. But this is a serious business. So make sure that you do this correctly. You think about having that easy to remember, short to type domain name. So here's just a little FYI for you. So in terms of domain names, there is the subdomain is the www. As you know, you don't need to type this into a browser right now, but way back when we did. This is the domain itself. The domain is the name that you want to have your URL. And then the top level domain here is the .com. As you know, there's .com, .edu, .org. They've got all kinds of dots. Now that is a variations that you can purchase. The best obviously is .com. If you're an educational provider, edu. If you are a not-for-profit, .org. .gov is a government agency. So if you can grab the .com, that's the best, because that's what most people are going to remember. However, just keep in mind it's not always going to be possible, so you'll want to focus on grabbing the domain name that you can. So now that you've learned a little bit about, you have to find a host, you got to grab that domain name, and there's a number of different organizations out there. I have some in Canvas where you can purchase the domain names if possible, or do some searches. You want to select a web platform, and a web platform is what you're going to build your website on. And so there's lots of things to think about as you're doing this. Most students, when I'm talking about web platforms, they already have a website if they have a small business. And most people are going to get to a web builder, and they don't put a lot of thought and energy into it, except for maybe what it costs or how easy it is, the web builder, to use. So there's people who use Wix, there's people who have an e-commerce store that use Shopify or Squarespace. But what I want you to keep in mind most of all is, what do you want this website to do for you in the long term? If you are just a small service provider and you want what we call brochureware, or just some, a nice website that has some good copy on it, that has a good call to action, that maybe you just want somebody to call you or maybe fill out a simple form, a web builder is probably just fine for you. However, if you are going to be a sophisticated marketer and you want to have lots of flexibility in what you're going to do, maybe you want to integrate with other types of services like event providers, or maybe calendarizing, or doing some gamification, taking e-commerce, lots of different types of marketing systems. You want to pick a platform that will have a lot of plugins. And what I mean that is, it integrates with other systems. uh, particularly, different types of gateways, different types of merchant processors, etc. So think about this and there's some things to read about as you go into Canvas in the module to look this up. So the other thing I want you to keep in mind, do you want to own your content? Some of these providers, the web builders, read their terms and conditions. They are not going to simply let you port your content or your pages to another web platform. So the one web platform that will allow you to do that is WordPress. So WordPress is generally one of WordPress. I think almost 70% of all websites are on WordPress, and the reason being for that is it's been around forever. It definitely has the many integrations, far more than anybody else, thousands of integrations. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about it. Sure, it's a little bit more difficult to use. You could also, so there's two different types of WordPress. WordPress.org, which is, just a basic free service, a blogging platform that you can basically create for your own, any site, any integration you want. If you want an easier to use web builder, then WordPress.com. The difference between the two is just the .com, as it's got an interface to help you with the web building, costs a little bit more. So, but if you're just trying to do a small website that's going to be, just a place for people to go to collect information on them, or having something simple, you can use a web builder as if you'd like. My preference is WordPress. I have my own personal website on WordPress, and I've built many a corporate website using WordPress. So it's up to you, but I want you to think about those things. So let's refresh. First thing you're going to do, who's going to host it? You're going to host your site internally or externally. What is your domain name that you're going to use? Make sure it's simple, short, easy to remember, and try to get that .com if you can. And what sort of platform are you going to build your website on? Are you going to do it yourself? Are you do you have some skills in coding? Are you going to need more of a web builder that's going to help you easily update and change it? But remember, the one thing that I want you to do is be really careful of the terms and conditions, because you want your website to grow with your business. Websites are expensive to build, they're expensive to maintain if you're doing it yourself or if you're hiring it out. So make a good decision as to what of those three things you're going to do. So as always, if you have questions, feel free to drop me a note and email me through Canvas. And as always, if you'd like to subscribe to my YouTube channel, I'd really appreciate it. You can find this and other marketing related topics on it. Take care and have a fantastic day.